Hello.
Hello, John.
Hey,
So
Man,
nice of you to join us.
if you know anything about that show, you know I know crap about technology.
That's right. Yes. Well, hey, we made it this far, right? And even we on
My
the fly, we're trying to learn how to record stuff. But I think we've worked out all the technical kinks. I think we're good to go.
oh yeah, we're all set, 100%. How are you, John?
I'm doing all right. I wish I had my 14-year-old son with me to get this thing all set up.
To be honest, you're doing fantastic so far. so,
Shoot. They
um, go ahead.
the only reason I got Zoom is cuz school got canceled and I needed Zoom so I could keep up with my son's stuff.
What we'd like to do today is I have 10 questions here. I'd just like you to answer as honestly as possible. They're not very difficult questions. Most of them are pretty straightforward. And we would love to just hear what you have to say. I don't expect you to have a perfect memory of everything that happened then. It was over 10 years ago. So I definitely, I won't blame you if you don't remember everything. But some of these will be pretty straightforward. What do you think about that?
Well, we'll see what the questions are first. You know, you get contacted by some guy on the internet, you got to be a little guarded. So,
Well, I figured somebody who was involved in To Catch a Predator would know that, right? Nothing very personal. If at any point, though, there's a question you don't want to answer, that's fine. We'll just skip it. But
okay.
I'll start with something pretty simple. Why don't you first introduce yourself, say your name and your current job title.
John Dudinskie, I'm a detective in Kentucky.
Describe your day to day in your current role in law enforcement.
Uh, just do detective work, handle everything from homicide down to forged money, bad checks.
Very cool. What is your professional history from the time you graduated college till now?
Okay, I didn't go to college first. I was a military policeman.
Hmm.
Then I became a Frankfurt policeman. After 4 years in the military, I served 17 and a half years with the Frankfurt Police Department in Kentucky and retired with the rank of captain. The reason I retired so early was I bought 10 years of time. They allow you to buy time. So I bought my military time and some ghost time. So I reached a point where I was making more to stay or making more if I left than if I stayed. So I went to the Attorney General's office and 2.5 years there. I worked Medicaid fraud and abuse, elder abuse, and they moved me over to public corruption. Uh, got a little tired of doing that, so I went to the Department of Highway Safety, where I taught classes on motorcycle and so forth safety. Missed investigations, went back to work for the Office of Inspector General in Medicaid fraud. Medicaid kept drawing me in, but I'll tell you the truth, I hate Medicaid. And ended up as their branch manager of the Commonwealth of Kentucky's welfare fraud unit. Missed law enforcement, had worked it out with my old department, Frankfurt Police. Went back there as a detective for 6 months before the current job I'm in offered me a little more money and a little quieter town to work my retirement job in. So I came here to Eminence, Kentucky.
Okay. How long were you with the KBI?
Just 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm. And you enjoyed your time with them?
I did.
Why don't you tell us about your interactions with the Dateline NBC crew? Did they interfere heavily, or were they keeping a respectful distance?
Say that one more time. Did they interact? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. So when it came to Dateline NBC, were they heavily interfering with the procedures in the station, or were they keeping a relatively respectful distance?
As far as I could tell, they kept a respectful distance. The only ones I really ever interacted with, I only met Chris Hansen for like 20 minutes in the gym when I was working out. But the only guy I interacted with at all really was the set man, who and only because I sought him out, I was interested. They had a lot of hidden cameras.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'd worked narcotics with wires and cameras and stuff, I was interested in what they did, and he would show me what he puts together. But as far as them involving themselves in the actual investigation I was doing, I didn't see much of them except their cameras.
Okay.
But now keep in mind, I wasn't at the higher levels where my job was to interview or to be on a chase car, stuff like that. So I wasn't interacting with them like the commissioner was and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I remember he did like some sit down interviews with the Dateline team.
Right. I never felt though that our commissioner was being run by them.
I didn't get that vibe either. In most cases, the stings in the investigation sort of they were working as much in tandem with law enforcement. Not one was overshadowing the other, which not only made for some great television, but put a lot of bad guys behind bars. So,
right.
Why do you think that so many of the men caught on the show, especially in the Kentucky sting, were so willing to talk with you and the other investigators without lawyer representation?
I don't know. I just think kind of the same reason they all seem to want to talk to Chris Hansen is they just want to come up with some excuse why they're there. They know they're had. So the best thing the best thing I think they can think is, okay, I got to come up with a better story than what they've got on the internet on me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of like a kid. If you catch them doing something, they're going to come up with the best lie they can for the reason they're doing it.
And it's often not very convincing, is it? As we heard, we've been reviewing some of the old the footage and investigations and interrogations with some of the guys, and some of the things they come up with are ridiculous. Why don't you tell me, did you have any special roles that were varying because of the investigation going on with Dateline NBC? Were you taking on any sort of special role or doing anything you wouldn't normally do? And how were you briefed about like the suspects before they came in? Was it again just like every other time you've ever dealt with a suspect, or was there some sort of like special etiquette that was going on?
No, I'll be honest with you. Now on that one, that was the first one I'd ever done. I'd gone with our cybercrimes unit in the past just to do interviews, but mainly my job for the first 2 nights there, I was working on arrest team and not interviewing anybody. And then they asked me if I would mind interviewing because I was in a chase car. Actually, I was having an easy time of it, not dealing with any of it. But they'd asked me if I would do some interviews for them. So it just happened that one was the one I ended up with, McFetrich, I think his name is.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it was just, I interviewed him just like I would anybody else. Nobody ever asked me to ask a particular question. That interview, honestly, was purely the way I interview about every single person in my life. When they introduced me what was going on, they gave us a pile of chats. That was the only one out of I had 5 or 6 they were talking to. So the only thing you got information on was you would probably get a driver's license, like a photo and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and the chat logs. And because you know my history with computers, I never even seen a chat log before this stuff. Because our cybercrime stuff, that was downloading pictures and getting stuff like that. So you could interview them about that. I never dealt with chat logs before, and I started reading them. I didn't realize all that stuff was even going on. I guess I was a little behind the times on computers. But in any event, I read all the chat logs that I was assigned, and when I went in there, I guess it's noticed that I called him the wrong name several times. So
we always speculated that was a tactic to make him uncomfortable.
No, that's a Dudinskie thing. I coach a lot of baseball, and whatever kid looks like, I call them, or if it's closer to their name, I'm happy. I'm not real good on names, and
I'm happy you actually remember quite a bit about Dustin. I was going to ask you, what is it you remember most about him, and how did you react to learning about his disability? Did that at all play a role in how you were approaching him as a suspect? Did you know to play into something with that, or did you just, like you said before, treat it like you would any other suspect?
Well, what I did was I the chats. I saw them coming in. And what I try and do, and you can't always do it, I got lucky in that instance, is I start to measure up the person as I see them come in and try and figure out their personality just on what I see or what kind of words I'm reading. And I approach my interviews like that. I teach an interview class, and one of the things I teach everybody is before you interview the person, learn everything you can about that person. In that case, you don't have as much time on Dateline NBC because it's the first time you're seeing them, rather than if you're working a case and building a case. But so he was interviewed based on what I saw of his personality.
Does the name Lorne Armstrong ring a bell?
I've seen his name connected with To Catch a Predator, but I have no idea who he is.
We're curious if you had any interaction with him.
I've watched the show, the video of me once or twice, because somebody sent me something where they looked at the read technique or something and compared it to what I did. And I've never been to read training, so apparently I was using the read technique and didn't know it. I just interview just by asking questions I want to know. So,
Well, it's a combination of a lot of things, but Lorne Armstrong specifically has sort of not only his interrogation and his involvement in the sting, but what he's done after the fact has sort of caused this renaissance resurgence of interest in this show again, and has led a lot of people to revisiting old footage, including your interview with Dustin and the guys that were caught on the Kentucky sting and all of the Dateline NBC sting. So it's hard to describe because the footage itself the show is old. It's past its time. Most of these guys have served their sentence or are still in prison, but there's still this curiosity.
That's what I can't understand, the interest in this.
It's an interest of character, I believe.
It's a character study. It's a psychological character study. You're witnessing somebody on their worst day of their life and watching how they react and how they try to wiggle out of things, whether or not they do own up to things. And then after the fact, years later, you'd think if you were on this show, you would want nothing to do with the internet ever again and would never engage anybody about this. But some people, Lorne included, tried to build a community off of his infamy, tried to gain a following, tried to make money off of his infamy. I kid you not. A sex offender caught on the show was trying to use his notoriety to start a YouTube channel to get people to pay to watch him sing karaoke and cook things.
Well, that's a good thing about the internet is nuts find each other.
You are certainly correct about that. And you wouldn't believe it, but old Lorne found himself in jail again not too long ago. Probation violations, quite a few actually. He's out now, but we'll see how long it takes him to get back into the community again. He just can't seem to stay up. I mean, they touch on this. Chris does a lot of the times in his interactions, whether or not they have an addiction or a compulsion to the internet. And I definitely believe Lorne does.
Oh, yeah.
I think you already touched on this before, but I just wanted to ask one more time. Do you believe that for such an unusual case as this was, an internet televised news sting, that all the cases were handled with the same amount of care you would treat any other suspect and processed to the fullest extent of the law? Do you feel like justice was served across the board?
Well, as far as the law enforcement, the way they acted, or as far as the courts acted?
Well, that's a good thing to differentiate from. How do you feel that your KPI team had acted versus what the courts did?
Well, here's how I can put it to you. I don't follow. If I arrest somebody and I'm in court to hear the sentence, I still don't know what Dustin McFetridge got. I look at it all the time as I did my job. Courts will do their job, and I don't get mad about it. I don't get upset about it. I'm just indifferent because I know I've got a job to do, and I'm just going to do my job. So I can't even tell you what he got time-wise. But I can tell you this, that in the KBI's cases of what I've seen of the show, every officer in there worked as if they were actually working alone in a room in a case.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that anybody was playing anything up for a camera or anything like that, or treating anything any differently. I know nobody wants to be embarrassed on TV, so they might have been more guarded with their words or something.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can see, I'm usually not like that. I don't have much of a filter, so it didn't affect me any. But I see shows, and it's just not this one. I see shows where cops are like live PD or something like that, where I feel as though they're playing things up for a camera. I don't think that happened in our instance, but I think in a few of these shows, I think from what I'd seen of different shows, I think that maybe they might have been doing a little bit more than what they would have done on an actual call. I don't want to badmouth other cops. I don't know their personalities, but I've seen one. I'm like, why are you even doing that? You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. There are people.
Definitely.
Anybody will behave differently if there's a camera on them. Like that. Thinking to the sting and just your entire career in law enforcement, I'm curious to know what are some creative excuses you've heard from suspects over the years.
Well, in this area, I didn't work a lot of this, but I just when I watch these shows or I watch other people's interviews or my own, I don't know if there was one that really stands out as super creative. There was one of them pedophiles that I really wanted to get so I could interview him, and he didn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to hear his excuse because he was a youth pastor.
Oof.
But it had starting from the beginning to the end of every grooming aspect you could think of. You know, it went from you need Jesus to finally at the end, I love you and I'm going to marry you. And okay, let's just have sex. So I wanted to meet that fella and hear his excuse, but pretty much they're all creative. It's the same 3 or 4 stupid reasons all the time. I was mentoring. I was looking to take care of them. If, I wouldn't have done anything. I was just showing up because they needed a friend. None of them were ever going to do anything. But they drove 200 miles and not do it. So I guess all the excuses is probably not too colorful for you. I just tell you the truth. They're all stupid excuses. You were sitting there with your chat log. And I never, when I did them with KBI that were not videotaped, I never got any excuses really except either the mentoring aspect or the friend aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty much it.
Well, Dustin wanted to marry her, and I'm surprised you didn't grant him the request of when he gets out of there, he can go home and delete all the child porn from his computer because he's been meaning to do that. I'm surprised you didn't go for that.
Yeah.
Jeez, he's certainly a wolf in sheep's clothing. That Dustin sure comes off pretty innocent. But you, I mean, not only having talked to him but read his chat log, you know just what kind of monster these guys are, and that actually leads me right into my next question. Do you believe there is any helping somebody who's as far gone as Lorne or Dustin or John Wesley Elliott, who are people that were engaged in a sexual chat online with a minor, possessed child pornography, attempted to create child pornography, and attempted to meet and or abduct a child? Like, is there any helping somebody like that?
Well, I would always hope that there is. But I just don't know, because I know your mind's programmed to do what your mind wants, and I don't know. I don't see the draw. I don't see the interest myself, but obviously that's what somebody would be drawn to. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if they could ever stop being drawn, but maybe they could learn to, control themselves and know that the penalty isn't worth what they're going to be doing. So I don't know. I don't really have an answer on that I can say for sure. That's for probably some psychologist somewhere.
That's a good point. I was just curious from a law enforcement point of view, where, I mean, of course, the ultimate goal is rehabilitation, hoping that through due process in the judicial system, it acts not only as a deterrent, but as a form of, reformation to transform criminals from out of their criminal patterns. And you know what? In most, I would say almost in most cases of guys caught in the history of the show, most of them have not reoffended, at least to my knowledge. Some are very obviously never going to learn their lesson, but because of their sex offender status now, it's a lot harder for them to violate the terms of their probation and get in trouble like that. You know, they're banned from the internet, and if all the good that comes out of it is you've taken away the means of a bad person to prey on somebody, then I think that's mission accomplished. Even if that person has never really learned their lesson, as long as they don't have the means to reoffend and recommit the crime, then I think that's a job well done.
Very well.
I only have kind of like 1.5 more questions here. This will go back to what we were talking about in terms of interrogation. What are some interrogation tactics that you use when dealing with a suspect? What do you find that almost always seems to work versus some strategies that are more of a case-by-case basis?
I'm just going to tell you my interview idea right now, and it's never changed. It's always the same. And here it is. It's really hard. I ask the questions I want to hear answers to. If I know they're telling me the wrong answers, I ask them a different way. And I look at it as a tree. And the first answer they give, we're going to have to build on that answer and go to another branch and another branch. They can lie all day to me. I've been to a lot of interview classes where they teach you're going to look up and to the right, or you're going to watch your body language. You and I, everybody in the world who pays any attention to humans knows when somebody's lying to them. Mm-hmm. The answer is they're only going to confess when you can get them to confess. And that means that they have to be ready. Nobody's going to confess. You can't make somebody confess. So my thought is when I'm building that tree limb, I go up the tree, I go to the first limb. They told me to lie in the trunk, on the mast of the tree. They've told me another lie. Now we're out on a limb. My theory is I just keep asking more questions, because eventually either they're going to trip up and they're going to have to come clean, or they're going to tell such a story that no judge or jury will ever believe it happened the way they said it happened. Mm-hmm. In other words, if something's out of the ordinary in an interview, I keep keying in on that part. And then they have to add another lie to cover their unordinary part, which makes it out of the ordinary again on another section. So before you know it, they have I liken it to a kid. If you ask a kid, they're sitting in a living room alone, glass of milk is spilled. You walk in and the kid says, I didn't do it. They're the only one in the room. I'm talking about 3-year-old, 4-year-old. Mm-hmm. And you say, okay, well then how did it get spilled? Well, a monkey came running through here and hit it. Okay, well, we know that isn't true, but I'll go with that. How'd the monkey get in? Well, he opened the window. Okay, well, it's locked from the inside. Well, monkey locked it back. Every story you get from a kid like that, and suspects are the same way. Anybody who has something to hide can't keep it up forever. Something's going to be out of the ordinary of what they normally do or what human nature is, and that's where you got them. You got them right there.
Wow.
Because at that point, they're either going to confess because they're going to realize how stupid this sounds, or they're going to go to a jury and you're going to play the recordings or talk about the interview, and the judge and jury aren't going to be fooled because they're humans too. And they go, wait a second, I wouldn't go around the block 4 times before I showed up at this person's house, or whatever the story is. Mm-hmm. People do what people do, and that's the way I interview. I interview on what people do, and my wife hates that I say this, and I know it was said in that interview because she actually, former language teacher, pointed it out and points it out every time I say it. That don't make no sense. So when it don't make no sense, I keep asking and keep harping on that. So, well, that's my interview technique, and that's what I use with every single person, regardless. Now, when I decide what type of person they are, depends on how those questions are asked. Somebody who thinks they're in charge of the world, I'll handle it where I've got the upper hand in that. Somebody who's a little more sympathetic type person, who's meek and mild, I adjust accordingly to their personality. But at the end of the day, all the questions are the same. I want to know what happens. Either you're going to tell me or you're going to tell me some convoluted, goofed up story that is never going to make sense to anybody.
Well, John, I gotta say this has been fantastic. I'm gonna turn it over to AJ to see if he has any questions before we sign off. But my last thought, I just have to ask.
I gave up my lunch break for you, so I hope you appreciate it.
Wow, that's fantastic. This will be
thank
wrapped
you
up
very
soon.
I'm going to be starving.
I gotta know, when you sat down with Dustin and he said, "I don't like lawyers," what was going through your head?
Well, I like lawyers myself, but a lot of good friends of mine are lawyers. But if a suspect doesn't like a lawyer, I'm kind of happy to hear that.
As evidenced by that entire. I mean, he ended up confessing to crimes that he wasn't even like being charged with. I think that's just owed to your ability as a interviewer and communicator to really make them feel comfortable enough to trust you. And boy, did it work. Again, I want to thank you again. AJ, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, John, I just wanted to touch on one subject. You mentioned that prior to getting into the show, working with the show, you weren't really too familiar with these chat logs. You haven't, really put your hands on some prior to the show. So my curiosity is, how has, we all know about predators. We've always known about them. They've come to light more because of a show like this and different people bringing awareness to it. So I'm just curious, how has your perspective or your awareness of predators and how much they're out there, how much has the show and your experience on the show, working on the show, how has that affected and changed your perspective on predators?
Well, I never cared much for them in the first place, but
Oh,
the thing about it is that the thing I learned from the chat logs is that none of them are the same. They follow the same type of grooming processes, but some are quicker than others and some are shorter than others. But it has helped me later on learning that stuff about how they act to working crimes now. But things have changed so much. I came on law enforcement in 1990, and now I was just telling a guy this morning because I had to call for codes on a phone that I'm downloading and doing a search warrant on right now. And I said every single thing I deal with just about has a phone component to it, and texts and messages and snaps. And, it's wild how it works. But the predator aspect of it, I don't look at chat logs anymore, but they're so easy for kids to get hooked into that. That's the scary part for me, I guess, being a dad, because I'll ask my son, he plays on these video games and he's talking to people, and of course he knows what he can say and what he can't say or something. But I'll actually question him, and I'll question him, does anybody ever show up on your, whatever app he has or whatnot, and start talking to you about anything, or my daughter, but so, it just, I'm in awe of it myself that people are that bold, because this day and age, like with the show, everybody's looking at you. Everybody's looking for you. They're doing, all this eavesdropping and looking for certain things. I know the cyber guys have told me what they look for, but I can't even describe it to you. It's too in depth for me. But you're going to get caught. What are the chances of some really gorgeous 15-year-old girl wanting to be with a 55-year-old guy?
Right.
It's just, how can they not know they're doing, they're going to get caught? It's gone from, the thing that bothers me about it is it's gone from the uncle who, and I'm not saying that's good, but in the old days, it was always the uncle or family friend or something like that. Now it's an anonymous person in another state asking the kid to come meet them in a different state. That's the scary part.
what do you think of, I don't know if you're aware, but there are groups online who do their own sort of hooking, sort of mimic what To Catch a Predator has established, and they draw someone in through their own, made up profile, and then
The
they meet them.
vigilante stuff.
Vigilantes. What do you think of those people, if you're aware of them?
Well, the only one I ever knew of was Perverted Justice. And I don't know. I don't know how much they always worked with law enforcement, but I'm not really a big fan of the groups of people doing stuff. I guess it would be based on individual group because I don't want anybody taking their law in their own hands. Like a guy shows up and they beat his ass. That's, or a guy shows up and they've notified the police of all the chat logs and then the police set up the actual arrest. I guess I could live with that scenario, but vigilanteism is never a good thing in my eyes right off the bat. But I guess it depends on how they're working it. If they're working it in conjunction with the police and letting the police know what they're doing, I don't have as big a problem, but still, I don't know if I'd want to be involved in that.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty satisfied. I think this was very enlightening, and I think this is really going to help us with our project. I'll be happy to keep you up to date as the project rolls along. Like I said, it's in its early infancy, but I want to thank you once again for joining us today. This was really, really special, and I'm glad we got to do this. Going forward, you have my contact information. If you want to follow up with anything, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, I'm going to let you get back to your lunch, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening and the rest of your day. Take care.
All right, thanks. We'll see you.
Take care, John.